Thank you to all my channel members, including my fan appreciation level members and my contributor level members, for helping support the YouTube channel.
Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have my book review of the book The Mortal Knight by Micahel Cronk. This is the second book in his Immortal Investigations series. I actually reviewed not too long ago the first book in the Immortal Investigation, and I really enjoyed it, and so I decided that I would at least continue on. And I knew after reading the first book that I had certain issues with some of the writing, but I was willing to give it a shot. And also, the author was willing to send me he actually sent me all the first three books that released earlier this year, end of last year, all in like a nice box set. So I was like, I'll try out book 2 and see how it goes. And my feelings on book 2, The Mortal Knight, are very similar to how I feel about The Mortal Investigations. But what I'll say is, what worked for me worked even better. And then what didn't work for me before worked even worse this time. So it's a very interesting bag. So we'll start off talking about like the world. This is very much a Dresden Files style mystery. You have a guy who works for the police force. He's a detective. He is wrapped up. He is a mortal, normal human, but he is wrapped up in all this immortal stuff going on. If you've read the first book, you know he ends up getting tangled up with some vampires and ends up kind of dating one of them. And so he's part of this family with the vampires, and he is trying to help them because they are on bad financial footing and they need to get back their power of their house. And so in this book, they go to this party to try to strike up conversations and try to see if they can find some new business ventures. The problem is that someone is murdered at the party, and so the book partially becomes the finding out who murdered the person at the party. It becomes what's going on with all these immortals, how can they elevate their house, how can they stop the other houses that are elevating, stuff like that. And so it's really interesting and that stuff. The plot of the book is fantastic, and the way that the book just breezes through the story, I love. Micahel Cronk has such an easy writing style that you just go along with it. You're just following along. The dialogue and the action and the descriptions are all perfectly balanced in just the right way. The story it's all about getting the story done in a lot of ways, and so I like that. However, there were a lot of things in this book that bothered me and really didn't work for me. And this is going to be what works for you might not work for me. And I don't normally take a lot of time to like address this in my books, but it felt like I had to here. Micahel Cronk is obviously someone with a worldview that is very liberal and, as some might describe, very woke. And I've read a lot of books by a lot of very liberal, very woke people. And I'm usually okay with it. And, as long as, you tell me a good story, I'm usually okay with it. And I will say that generally he did tell a good story here. And so I did like that part of it. Here's where the issue comes, is when so much of the book becomes wrapped up in the values, in the worldview of the author, that it's not just the inclusion of a character I disagree with, or it's not just the inclusion of a subplot that, I disagree with. It is when the way the characters talk to each other, the way that the worldview of the book is presented, the way that the themes infect the book, the way that the worldview, even if it gets to affecting the story. And I'll give a couple of examples. So in this book, our main character, Jason, is obviously trying to be very woke because his girlfriend, who's a vampire, is very old. She's been, around for a while, and so she's very much has a lot of more traditional values, especially her family does. And so he is actively pushing for her not to marry him, to just date him, and yet still fool around. He also and that was also in kind of the first book. So I kind of knew that was there. But then it goes a step further where he's trying to get her to kind of like reject the boundaries that are in like traditional families. And he ends up encouraging her to leave her family when he finds out certain information about them. And then there's the encouragement of lying, and then there's a few things where there are several instances where he is trying to encourage her to build herself up and not to just tear herself down all the time. And in that sense, that's fine, but it became to the point where the main character is trying to outwoke himself all the time. He is trying to prove that he is nice towards women. He's trying to almost prove to the reader that he is a good guy. There's also a very anti-religious, anti-Christian themes, particularly with King Reynold in the book, and with the way it portrays the history of Christianity is very frustrating. And I would say that, especially when talking about the history of Christianity, if you've read Philip Pullman and you've read his Dark Materials, you will understand similar types of issues that crop up in his Dark Materials. And I'm okay with interesting world building, but when you try to take an existing religion and then try to change it, and then you purposefully make it look in a bad light, it's just very frustrating, especially since I am of that religion, of Christianity. And then you have, there were so many little things thrown in on top of all of this. Like there was a bunch of gay characters and a bunch of gay jokes and there's a trans character mentioned, and there's a character who's divorced, and there's a character who's had an abortion, and then they talk about why it was the right thing for them to do. And again, our main character of Jason is trying to outwoke himself, proving why it's okay to have the abortion. And so much of the book's worldview, so much of the book's perspective, so much of the character's dialogue. And it's really hard to describe this, but the way the character talks is just filled with the worldview. And sometimes, it doesn't rub me the wrong way when I read this, but it was so over the top here that it took away from the reading experience. And while the story was fantastic, the writing style suffered because of it. And it made me not want to continue with the series. I have book 3, A King in Waiting, which after finishing this book, I know exactly what that's referring to, and I'm like, ooh, that's interesting. But I'm not sure I'm going to continue because the worldview issues are so strong. And I'm going to say a few things as just a few notes. One, you probably, as a viewer, you may not be bothered by this. If you're not, go read the book, have fun, leave a good review for Michael. And if, you're like, how can that bother you? Well, think about when authors include other worldviews, and it's so hard-hitting and it's so strong. There are sometimes I've even read conservative authors where I'm like, man, you're just focusing on the worldview here. I really want more. I just want escapism fantasy. And for some people, this will be escapism fantasy because that's part of their worldview. But for some of us who don't have that, it's very frustrating. So I'm not necessarily blaming Micahel Cronk in the sense that, that's his worldview, but it took away from my reading experience, and therefore it affects how I feel about the book. The story and the mystery behind the book I thought were excellent. I thought that the worldview just dragged it down substantially. I would give the book a 7 out of 10. It's still generally a fun read, but just note going in, it's a very worldview heavy book. It is not a book. It's not like the type of Hollywood projects where there's this minor thing over here. Oh, well, there's this reference to this thing over here. No, it is front and center in this book. And so if that's going to bother you, maybe don't pick it up. So that's how I felt about reading The Immortal Knight by Micahel Cronk. If you've read this book, let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.